So I'm doing everything backwards because I'm in the process. I'm actually supposed to be beginning sort of like an intro to the document that I'm creating for people to be able to share their like herbal information. I'm like supposed to be comparing it to like a quilt. If if you follow me on anything, you know that I talk a lot about HIV and AIDS and that I've studied it for a long time. And I usually mention, excuse me, got something in my eye. I usually mention how it works alongside the herpes virus. I talk a lot about the herpes virus because I get recurrent cold sores. And the herpes virus just basically helps you understand like so many other viruses. So anyway, I was supposed to actually be working on that, but I am not. I actually moved over to the air purification part of my document, but maybe it's because it actually needs to go first. I'm not really sure, but basically, like, I've been saying this for several years. Um, Air purification is a treatment. That's why I almost talk more about it than herbs now, because air purification is a treatment, and I think one, people resist that because most people don't ask, and then I also think that people resist it because, sorry, there's a little bit of cat hair in the air and I'm cooking, so it's making my skin a little irritable. Um, I think people also resist it because it might be kind of hard to understand, and I keep trying to explain something about the vaccine therapies alongside um, basically all this stuff. The herbal stuff is like the easiest way to understand treatment because when you pop a pill into your mouth, right, or supplement, it makes something change. The air purification is a little bit harder to understand as a treatment because people might be like, treatment for what? What's in the air? And so I guess what I'm starting with is that there's always pathogens in the air, and I feel like this might also be hard for people to understand, but there humans are always sick. Okay? Humans always have acute infections. It's a little hard to understand, and I think I came to understand this as I got sicker and sicker because I have a severe immune deficiency issue. Um, like, I can feel it, and most people can't. But sometimes when you sneeze, when you're around another person, you are sneezing because the other person is sick. Okay? It's a really, really different way to think about sickness. And you can think of it as something like way quicker than a cold. Okay? There's pathogens everywhere, and your body is like really, really dope. Your immune system is like very, very fascinating, and it can do things. It's extremely sensitive. Some people's is very, very sensitive, and it makes these like constant notations like my body does. And then some people's, they don't really have signs, and some people's might be something minor, like being around another person who actually is sick, sneezing a few times and then suddenly being okay. Those sneezes, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those are actually acute infections, and your body immediately building antibodies and shutting down that pathogen. Prior to COVID, we didn't really understand this just because we didn't have as much illness prior to COVID. But now that COVID exists and COVID harms your T cells, it's much easier to understand. And I think it disturbs people a little bit just because it sounds like you're saying, oh, humans are always filthy and disgusting. It's not really that. It's just like our bodies are really cool. There's pathogens everywhere, and your body just shuts them down. Like when pollen goes into your nose, your body like will create snot, and the snot physically removes the pollen. Or sometimes even like your snot, because it's a mucus, um, I think it's proteins, I could be wrong. Those proteins also break down the proteins in pollen and keep them from going into your lungs and messing things up. And that might also be why you sneeze. It's easy to understand with pollen. It's a little bit harder for people to understand with something like a pathogen, like a virus. Like you're sneezing because you're around someone who's sick. That's a little harder for people to understand. The reason why I've been bringing up Henrietta Lacks and the importance of the HeLa cells, I don't know if I'm saying this right. I'm pretty much self-taught, so I read everything online. That's why my pronunciation is bad. With Henrietta Lacks, I think it's really hard for people to understand this, but there's a combination of multiple things going on because she was a black woman. The biggest one is actually rape and sexual violence. And this is why I'm struggling so hard to like even begin the intro to the document. Cervical cancer can almost be completely eradicated with the HPV vaccine. The HPV vaccine is the vaccine for warts, human papilloma something virus, warts. There's a study that I'm going to link in the paper that basically explains that HPV can actually become airborne during ablation procedures, and that it can infect healthcare workers. I believe, based on that study, that that is clearly saying that it is airborne. And that in most cases, like people say that in like the studies say that in like 90% of all contractions, it eventually goes away. What I am saying is that I do not believe that it goes away. I think that the viral loads just get low enough to where that it doesn't show up on a test. But if you turn around and you give people the HPV vaccine, what I believe is happening, because we've learned this through long COVID, we've learned this through the Novavax vaccine, we've learned this through Novavax as a vaccine therapy, is that when you lower the viral load of certain things low enough, you do not show up as having an acute infection, even though you do. Okay? So sexual violence, like especially for the time that Henrietta Lacks was alive, was extremely high. It was mostly, the rapists were mostly white men, and then black men because we were segregated. I think nowadays it's flipped, and for black women, most of our rapists are black men. But at that time that she was alive, it like the you really can't comprehend the amount of sexual violence that an individual black woman would experience, especially a black child. So when you think about this, you kind of have to think about sexual violence, right? Think of the amount of infections that you are experiencing when you have people coming from outside your area, people who live inside your area, and then the recurrences of those viral diseases, especially in cases where they can be airborne. Okay? Now imagine if they actually are airborne and they combine with pollution in your polluted ass black neighborhood that has had chemicals dumped all through it. And you can't break these viruses down, and you don't have access to the vaccines because you're black and you're poor, and it's harder for us to access treatments, and doctors don't test us. Now think of the combination of all those things occurring together, right? Incredible levels of sexual violence from multiple communities, outsiders, insiders, so that you're never getting away from the diseases outside your community, and then you're never getting away from the diseases within your community. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about incest in black families, but I honestly can't cover that right now, and it should be an expert who talks about it. But anyways, combine all those things, and then combine the understanding that we have of something being airborne. Combine that with pollution and a lack of treatments and viral loads that sustain low enough that you live, but they cause mutations that create things like cervical cancers that perpetuate themselves over and over and over and over again in your body. And so you don't end up dying of the virus, you die of cancer. It's long been said by a lot of healthcare workers, including my mother, going back like 35 years, that cancer is actually caused by viruses, that cancer is a virus, but what they were stating was they understand that cancer seems to begin occurring within like a decade, 15 years of repeat viral infections. So what I'm trying, so this I want to do this as almost like the intro to my air purification set, but I honestly feel like it's kind of too complicated. Like I understand it well enough to explain it, and I have explained it to other people, and some people do understand it. Um, I don't think everyone understands the whole like HPV is airborne. Like I don't think people really get that part because like most people's bodies are not as sensitive as mine, so they're not noticing the things that I can actually see in my body when I'm around other people um, who I know have certain illnesses. I don't know. I think there's a way that I can put this all together, but I, I really don't know how to make it more simple, but I'm trying.